Dear learners, welcome back to WSE English Story, where learning English becomes an unforgettable adventure. Today, you will discover the story of a man whose courage changed the map of the world. His name was Ferdinand Magellan, and he led the very first voyage around the Earth. This is not only a story about ships and oceans. It is about the heart of a man who dared to dream beyond the horizon, who faced storms, betrayals, hunger, and battles, yet refused to turn back. His journey was not just across the sea, it was also a journey through fear, hope, and ultimate sacrifice. For you, dear learners, this story offers more than history. As you listen, you will improve your English step by step. But more than that, you will carry away the spirit of determination and resilience that can inspire your own life. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a wooden ship, hearing the waves crash, and looking toward an endless unknown. Could you take that step forward, not knowing what waits? Stay with me until the end, because the lessons of Magellan's journey are still alive today, lessons of courage, discovery, and the price of greatness. And if you'd like to support our work, you are always welcome to like, comment, share, or join us. Your support truly helps us continue creating meaningful stories for you. So, let's set sail together on this incredible voyage. At the end of the 15th century, Europe was a land of restless energy. The Middle Ages were fading, and a new spirit was rising, the Age of Discovery. Nations like Portugal and Spain were racing to find new trade routes to Asia, dreaming of gold, spices, and glory. For centuries, Europe had relied on land routes that stretched across deserts and empires. But those paths were dangerous, slow, and often closed by war. Whoever could find a direct sea route to the riches of Asia would hold the keys to power. Into this world, in 1480, a boy named Ferdinand Magellan, known in English as Ferdinand Magellan, was born in northern Portugal. His family belonged to the lesser nobility. They were not wealthy, but they had honor and connections that allowed young Magellan to dream of a greater future. His father served the local lord, and his mother died when Ferdinand was still a child. From an early age, he learned that life was fragile, and that greatness often demanded sacrifice. Portugal itself was alive with the sound of sails, ropes, and the cry of sailors preparing for distant voyages. Young Ferdinand grew up in a country obsessed with the sea. Explorers like Bartolomé Dias had already rounded the Cape of Good Hope, opening the gateway to the Indian Ocean. Vasco da Gama would soon sail to India, proving that fortune lay across the waves. For a boy of noble blood but limited means, the ocean was both a challenge and a promise. At the age of 12, Magellan became a page in the royal court of Lisbon. This was more than service, it was an education. He studied navigation, astronomy, and the art of war. He listened to tales of distant lands, of spices worth more than gold, of islands filled with treasures, of empires waiting to be discovered. Every story lit a fire in his heart. He began to believe that the sea was not a barrier, but a bridge to greatness. Yet life in the royal court also showed him the other side of ambition. He saw envy, rivalry, and the hunger for power that could destroy a man as quickly as a storm. Even as a boy, Ferdinand must have wondered, was he destined to serve quietly in the shadow of others, or would he one day command his own destiny across the oceans? This question would stay with him, shaping the choices of his youth. And as he stepped into adulthood, the winds of history were already rising, ready to carry him toward challenges he could not yet imagine. As Ferdinand Magellan grew older, the bright dreams of youth soon collided with the harsh realities of life at sea. Service to the Portuguese crown meant more than study and stories. It meant blood, sweat, and danger. In his 20s, he joined expeditions to the far corners of the world, sailing to India and Africa, where Portugal sought to build its empire of trade. Magellan's first challenges came in the form of war. On the coasts of India, he fought in naval battles that tested both his courage and his skill. He witnessed the brutal fight for control of trade routes, ships burning on the water, soldiers clashing under the fierce tropical sun. He also traveled to Malacca, in present-day Malaysia, where the Portuguese sought to dominate the spice trade. These were not the polished halls of Lisbon but wild, contested frontiers where a man could win honor or lose his life. Magellan fought bravely, but his ambition also created enemies. He was sometimes accused of acting without permission or seeking too much glory for himself. During one campaign in Morocco, he was wounded badly in the leg, leaving him with a permanent limp. That injury marked him forever, a visible reminder that the sea demanded a price from those who served her. Yet Magellan's spirit did not break. If anything, the limp became a symbol of his resilience, proof that he could endure suffering and still press forward. But greater trials awaited him. In the Portuguese court, Magellan sought recognition for his service. He asked the king for support to lead new voyages of exploration. He believed there was a western route to Asia, a path that no one had yet dared to attempt. But instead of reward, he found rejection. The King of Portugal doubted his loyalty, questioned his ideas, and dismissed his requests. For a proud nobleman and experienced sailor, the humiliation was sharp and painful. To be denied by his own king cut deeply into Magellan's heart. He had given his youth, his strength, and even his body to the service of Portugal, yet the crown turned its back on him. His vision of reaching Asia by sailing west seemed destined to die before it began. It was in this time of rejection that the inner conflict took root. Would Magellan remain loyal to a crown that refused him, or would he seek another path, even if it meant betrayal in the eyes of his homeland? It was not an easy choice. In those days, to change allegiance from one king to another was seen as treachery. But in Magellan's heart, the call of discovery was stronger than the fear of disgrace. Have you ever faced such a moment yourself? A moment when the world tells you no, but your heart whispers yes? For Magellan, that moment was now. And so, slowly, quietly, he began to turn his eyes away from Portugal and toward Spain, the rival kingdom across the Iberian Peninsula. There, perhaps, a new chance awaited, a chance to prove himself, and a chance to make history. When Ferdinand Magellan turned away from Portugal, he carried not only the weight of rejection but also the burden of a dream too large to abandon. He believed the riches of Asia could be reached by sailing west across the unknown ocean. If Portugal would not support him, then perhaps Spain, the rival kingdom hungry for glory, would listen. Spain had recently claimed the Americas, but the Treaty of Tordesillas divided the world between Spain and Portugal. According to the treaty, the Portuguese controlled the eastern routes to Asia, while Spain was left searching for another path. Magellan saw his opportunity. In 1517, he traveled to Seville, carrying maps, calculations, and a fire in his heart. At first, the Spanish officials doubted him. He was, after all, Portuguese, a man who had served their greatest enemy. Some whispered that he was a spy. Others laughed at his strange idea of sailing west into waters no European had crossed. But Magellan persisted. He presented his vision to King Charles I of Spain, the young monarch who would later become Emperor Charles V. Magellan promised him that beyond the Atlantic lay a secret passage that would lead directly to the Spice Islands, those fabled lands of nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon worth more than gold. The king listened. Spain longed to break Portugal's monopoly over the spice trade. Finally, in 1519, Magellan received the royal blessing to lead a fleet of 5 ships, the Trinidad, San Antonio, Concepcion, Victoria, and Santiago. It was the chance he had waited for all his life. Yet it came with enormous pressure. Success would bring him eternal glory. Failure could mean disgrace or death. The fleet gathered in Seville, and soon tensions began to rise. Many of the sailors were Spanish and mistrusted their Portuguese captain. They feared the dangers of the unknown sea. Rumors spread that Magellan was leading them to ruin, or worse, into Portuguese traps. Even before the first sail was raised, the seeds of rebellion were already planted. On August 10, 1519, the fleet finally set sail. Families wept on the docks as their sons, husbands, and fathers disappeared over the horizon. Few believed they would ever return. The Atlantic greeted them with rough waters, and Magellan had to prove his strength as both a navigator and a leader. He held the fleet together with discipline, order, and an unshakable calm. They crossed the Atlantic and reached the coast of South America, searching desperately for a passage through the continent. For months they sailed along endless shorelines, hoping for a gateway to the Western Ocean. Supplies grew thin. The men grew restless. Doubt gnawed at every corner of the expedition. Then came the first serious test of leadership, a mutiny. Several Spanish captains refused to follow Magellan's orders. They believed he was leading them to their deaths. In the cold waters of what is now Argentina, they rose against him. Magellan acted with both courage and cunning. With loyal men at his side, he confronted the rebels, crushed the mutiny, and executed or imprisoned the leaders. It was a harsh choice, but necessary. To maintain command in such desperate conditions, he had to show that discipline was stronger than fear. By the time the rebellion was over, Magellan's authority was secure. Yet the cost was heavy. He knew that ahead of him stretched a sea no European had ever crossed, an ocean that might prove endless. Still, he pressed forward. And so, in the midst of suspicion, hunger, and defiance, the first journey continued. What lay ahead was not only a test of navigation but a test of the human spirit itself. The greatest trial was yet to come. By late 1520, Magellan's fleet had spent more than a year searching for the passage to the west. Every mile of coastline seemed to end in disappointment, yet he refused to give up. His sailors cursed the endless winds and freezing cold of the South American coast. They wondered if the ocean he promised even existed. Yet in October, hope flickered like a lantern in the dark. At the southern tip of the continent, Magellan discovered a narrow, twisting passage between mountains and cliffs. The waters were dangerous, with strong currents and swirling tides, but it led somewhere new. This channel would later be named the Strait of Magellan. For the first time, Magellan could prove that a gateway to the Western Ocean was real. The crossing of the strait was a drama of both triumph and despair. One of the ships deserted, turning back to Spain in fear. Another was wrecked on the rocks. The fleet of 5 was reduced to 3. Still, Magellan pressed onward. When the remaining ships finally emerged into the open waters beyond, the sailors stared in awe. They expected violent storms, but instead, the sea was calm and wide. Magellan named it the Mar Pacifico, the Pacific Ocean, the peaceful sea. What they did not know was that this ocean stretched wider than any European could imagine. For 3 months and 20 days, the fleet crossed the Pacific with no sight of land. Supplies ran out. The sailors ate sawdust mixed with water. Leather straps from the rigging were boiled into soup. Rats became a prized meal. Scurvy spread, turning teeth black and leaving men too weak to stand. Death visited the ships quietly, one body after another slipping into the endless blue. In those moments, the strength of Magellan's will was tested to the limit. He too was hungry, exhausted, and sick, but he never let despair take control. His belief in the vision, that they would reach Asia if they only endured, was the only thing that kept the fleet moving forward. He stood on deck, gazing at the horizon, urging his men not to surrender. It is almost impossible to imagine the silence of those nights on the Pacific. No land, no birds, no other ships, only the vast black sky filled with stars and the endless sound of the ocean. What would you have felt, standing there, knowing you might never see home again? For Magellan's men, it was terror. For Magellan himself, it was destiny. At last, after months of suffering, they sighted land, the islands of Guam and later the Philippines. The men staggered ashore, kissing the ground, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They had done what no one in Europe had ever thought possible. They had crossed the largest ocean on Earth. This was the turning point of the voyage. The dream was real. The western route to Asia existed, and Magellan had found it. Yet, as with all great triumphs, the victory carried its own shadow. Ahead lay new lands, new cultures, and new conflicts. And it was here, in the islands of the Philippines, that the story would rise to its tragic climax. The strait had been conquered, the Pacific crossed, and the impossible achieved. But Magellan's greatest challenge, the test that would decide not only the voyage but his very life, was now approaching. When Magellan's fleet finally reached the Philippines in March 1521, the men were broken in body but alive in spirit. They had crossed an ocean that seemed endless, and the sight of green islands, fresh food, and kind people felt like a miracle. Here, the voyage seemed to change from one of survival to one of triumph. Magellan believed he was at the edge of success, within reach of the Spice Islands themselves. The local rulers welcomed him, intrigued by these strangers from across the sea. Magellan offered gifts, spoke of his king, and shared his Christian faith. Some chiefs agreed to ally with him and even accepted baptism. To Magellan, this was more than politics, it was destiny. He believed he was not only leading ships across the world but also spreading a greater mission, uniting peoples under God and crown. Yet, in this new land, a dangerous choice awaited him. A chief named Humabon, who had allied with Magellan, asked for help against a rival leader, Lapu-Lapu of Mactan. Humabon promised loyalty in return, but the battle was not Magellan's to fight. His mission was to find a route to the Spice Islands, not to become entangled in local wars. Still, Magellan believed that demonstrating strength would secure Spanish authority in the islands. His pride, his faith, and his vision all pushed him toward the decision. On the morning of April 27, 1521, Magellan led about 60 men to the shores of Mactan. As dawn broke, the water glowed with red and gold, as if the heavens themselves were warning of blood to come. The Spaniards carried steel and gunpowder, but they were far from home, and the tides were not in their favor. The battle began with arrows and spears from the warriors of Lapu-Lapu, who fought fiercely to defend their land. The Spaniards struggled to move through the shallow waters, weighed down by armor and weapons. Magellan stood in the thick of the fight, rallying his men. He was struck again and again, first by a poisoned arrow, then by spears, then by a blade that cut deep into his arm and leg. Still, he refused to retreat. He raised his sword high, protecting his men until the very last moment. Surrounded, wounded, and overwhelmed, he fell beneath the storm of weapons. His men, terrified, fled to the ships, leaving their captain's body behind. Ferdinand Magellan, who had dreamed of sailing around the world, would never see the completion of his voyage. He died on foreign soil, not as a conqueror but as a man who chose to stand by his vision until the very end. For his sailors, the loss was devastating. They wept and argued, unsure whether to continue or return home. Yet in the silence that followed, Magellan's sacrifice burned in their hearts. His death was not the end of the dream. The voyage had begun with him, but it would not end with him. Have you ever considered what it means to give everything for a dream, even your life? For Magellan, the price was ultimate. But because he paid it, the world would never be the same. In that moment on the shores of Mactan, history turned. The man was gone, but the mission lived on. The journey to complete the first circumnavigation of the earth was now in the hands of the few who remained. After Magellan's death at Mactan, the expedition stood at the edge of collapse. Their leader was gone, their numbers reduced, and their supplies dangerously low. Some argued to abandon the mission and sail home, while others feared that turning back would mean failure and disgrace. The fleet was battered. Of the original 5 ships, only 3 remained, the Trinidad, the Concepcion, and the Victoria. It was in this moment of despair that the true weight of Magellan's vision became clear. Though his voice was silent, his dreams still guided them, to sail beyond the horizon and return having circled the globe. The men elected new captains and decided to press forward, determined not to let their sacrifices be in vain. They continued westward, through seas filled with dangers both natural and human. In the Spice Islands, they finally reached their goal: cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon, the treasures they had sought for years. For a brief moment, the pain of hunger and loss was replaced by triumph. They had achieved what no one in Europe had thought possible. They had found a western route to Asia. But even victory carried new trials. Disease thinned their numbers. Local politics turned dangerous, and alliances collapsed into hostility. The Concepcion was burned to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. The Trinidad was captured by the Portuguese. At last, only one ship remained, the Victoria, under the command of Juan Sebastián Elcano, a Basque sailor who had once doubted Magellan but now carried his dream forward. In September 1522, the Victoria, worn and leaking, finally sailed back into Seville. On board were just 18 survivors out of the more than 200 who had departed 3 years earlier. Their faces were gaunt, their bodies weak, but their arrival was a triumph beyond imagination. They had circled the globe, proving not only that the earth was round, something scholars already knew, but that it could be traveled by ship in a single, continuous journey. This achievement shook the world. It rewrote the maps, expanded the known limits of human possibility, and marked the beginning of a new global age. Trade, culture, and power would forever be reshaped by the knowledge that the oceans connected every shore. For Spain, it was a moment of glory. For Portugal, a bitter reminder of what they had lost by rejecting Magellan. But for humanity, it was a milestone that belonged to all. The voyage showed that determination, endurance, and courage could overcome the greatest obstacles. Magellan himself had not lived to see the final victory, yet his spirit was present in every mile of that journey. His leadership had carried them through storms, mutiny, and starvation. His vision had pointed them toward the Pacific. His sacrifice had sealed their determination. Without him, the voyage would never have begun. Imagine the scene in Seville that day. Bells ringing across the city, crowds gathering on the docks, astonished faces as the battered ship crept into the harbor. 18 men, dressed in rags, stepped onto the land they had left 3 years before. They were ghosts returned from the sea, living proof of a journey that seemed impossible. The world had changed. And at the heart of it stood the name of one man, Ferdinand Magellan. Though he fell in battle far from home, his dream had circled the earth. Ferdinand Magellan's story is not only about ships and oceans, it is about the resilience of the human spirit. Though he never completed the circumnavigation himself, his leadership, vision, and sacrifice made it possible. The voyage was larger than one man, it was a bridge that connected worlds, proving that courage could reshape the map of history. Magellan's legacy is complex. To some, he was a hero of exploration, a man whose determination opened new paths across the seas. To others, he was a symbol of European conquest, whose arrival brought both discovery and conflict to the peoples he encountered. Yet beyond politics, there is a universal lesson: he dared to dream of the impossible, and he dared to act upon it, even when rejected, wounded, and doubted. His life also reminds us of the cost of greatness. The circumnavigation demanded hunger, disease, rebellion, and death. Magellan himself gave his life in the Philippines, cut down far from home. Yet without that sacrifice, the expedition might have dissolved into chaos. His choice to stand and fight, even against overwhelming odds, was a final act of leadership that gave his men the strength to carry on. The symbolic power of Magellan's journey lies in its circle. To sail around the earth is to embrace the idea that all shores are connected, that the horizon is not an end but a doorway. It is a reminder that the world is both larger and smaller than we imagine, vast in its oceans, but united in its humanity. And what does this mean for us today? Each of us faces our own oceans, challenges that seem too wide, too dangerous, too uncertain. Yet Magellan's example whispers across the centuries: dare to set sail. Do not let rejection stop you. Do not let fear of the unknown paralyze you. The voyage may cost more than you expect, but the discovery at the other side may change everything. So let us carry his lesson with us: resilience in hardship, faith in vision, and courage to step forward when others step back. For in every age, the spirit of exploration is not about maps or ships, it is about the human heart's refusal to accept limits. Have you ever wondered what horizon lies before you? What dream calls you forward, even when the world doubts you? That is where Magellan's story becomes your story too. Dear learners, you have just completed the incredible journey of Ferdinand Magellan, the man who dreamed of sailing beyond the horizon and gave his life to make it possible. His voyage proved that the world was not endless chaos but a circle that could be crossed, uniting distant lands. And though he fell before the journey's end, his vision carried his men home, completing the first circumnavigation of the earth. Magellan once said, "The sea is dangerous and its storms terrible, but these obstacles have never been sufficient reason to remain ashore." His words remind us that safety can never replace purpose. To stay ashore is to remain unchanged. To sail is to risk, but also to grow. So, what does his story mean for you? It means you, too, have the power to step beyond the safe shores of your life. Whether it is learning English, chasing a dream, or facing a fear, your own voyage begins with courage. And perhaps the storms you face will one day become the very proof of your strength. Share Magellan's story, carry forward his message, and let it inspire not only your English learning but also your daily choices. If this story touched you, support our work by liking, commenting, and subscribing. It truly helps us continue bringing meaningful stories to you. Until next time, keep learning, keep dreaming, and keep sailing beyond the horizon. Goodbye for now.